Afternoon, everyone. What's going on, guys? Give it a few minutes, let everyone pretty much trickle in. Everyone should be getting pinged here just shortly, and we'll kind of get started here. What's going on, Will? Let me take a look at something real quick. Just a sec, guys. All right. All right. Interesting. All right. So let's kind of get started here, guys. Kind of give you a little bit of what I pretty much saw in the markets. Kind of recapping yesterday's live where we left off, pretty much. But what a day of relief. I think I came on yesterday pretty much talking about the fact that we had already seen up to about 6 days of red. And that was pretty much the fact of where you're trying to time when the market was going to snap that red streak that we were on. And one of the biggest indications was pretty much, well, two biggest indications. One was pretty much SPY. On the SPY chart, you pretty much ultimately saw off of the weekly. And you basically saw that we hit the 50 EMA off of the weekly chart. That was pretty much my sign number one. That's what I kind of highlighted yesterday as well. So that was one big indication. The other indication, which I'm going to also just kind of pop up on the screen here real quick, was also looking at the US dollar. So now looking at the US dollar, I've been highlighting this for the past 2 days and looking at this ascending broadening wedge action off of the dollar here. And what I've been watching off of this is that you can basically saw that we ended up hitting that upper trend resistance line yesterday. And so once we started to hit that resistance yesterday and we started to close in, that gave me that indication that we were basically closing in on a relative top for the dollar, which is relatively also bullish for the equities, in which case you saw today. So that was pretty much the two signs, the weekly 50 EMA off of SPY, and then also the US dollar coming into resistance. So to also give you a better image, typically this kind of pattern, the ascending broadening wedge pattern that you see on the dollar here right now, is typically a bearish pattern. It's basically the inverse of what has actually been one of my favorite patterns, the descending broadening wedge, which is basically a flip. You basically see a very descending trendline support. In this case, you see a very ascending upper resistance line, in which once you typically hit that resistance line, that's when you start to regress rather rapidly. So it's kind of left to be seen how aggressively we're going to regress off of the US dollar here now, is what's kind of going to be something very interesting in the coming days, coming weeks here. So I'm going to want to see exactly how we end up progressing. Is it going to be in that sharp fashion in which we start to see equity start to rebound? Do we see, have we actually maybe in fact seeing the bottom of equities here for 2022 in which we start to see a rally going into the end of the year? We've been in a tremendous bear market rally. Well, I wouldn't say bear market rally. It is, yeah, for pretty much what the past few weeks here. So it's going to be interesting to see, in fact, with the dollar kind of getting a little bit toppish here right now, do we see a rebound in equities that's going to continue? Or was this pretty much a one day wonder in which the market's going to go right back into bear mode? So that's pretty much where I'm in a decisive outlook for the market here. Everything that I'm kind of pointing to is that the fact that we hit the 50 EMA, we saw a relative bounce. That's a positive sign. The dollar getting to that top end of its resistance tells me that we are due for what's going to be a at least a short-term rally to the upside. So that's what the indication is right now. Obviously, we're going to need to see the follow through tomorrow. It was a great follow through that we saw for pretty much most of the day here today. We saw a lot of different names, give us a big rally. And to also give you a little bit of perspective, from pretty much a technical analysis point, usually those traders that follow technical analysis very closely, they will say that typically news follows TA, right? And in this case, I do think that it is pretty much important to say that in the fact that that Apple news that came out overnight was not necessarily a surprise to me. The fact that demand was pretty much not as high as expected for the Apple iPhone, and then the fact that we saw it down about $4, and then I want to say Tesla showing some relative weakness earlier on in the morning, along with that decline in Apple. That was something that opened the doors for a lot of other tech names that we saw. We saw the monster run out of Netflix, monster run out of Meta, that I can say, Boeing add to the list, Microsoft, and then you could probably just point to the sign that Amazon and Tesla kind of came alive towards mid to the end of the day. So that was where it actually opened the door to me. I think the fact that we had the Apple news, we kind of knew that the market was kind of getting to a bottom formation. That definitely gave me the idea that we were going to see some kind of stellar, at least a single day wonder. And that's exactly what we saw. I think it was roughly even after 2 o'clock, after about lunchtime or so, and a lot of names were still near their high of the day, which is something that's usually gives you that strong indication of a strong trend day, and that's exactly what we pretty much saw. All right, DK, what's going on, my guy? Apple's STO came at close. Thoughts on that? I did not see that. Let me actually take a look and see the strike expiration. Will kind of give me a better idea. Let's see. So there was a sell to open on Apple. That was the 145 strike for 1118 at $1 million is what they actually hit on that. So it does tell me that even that we've seen Apple actually rally off of bad news. So it's not entirely out of the realm. And that also does give me a little bit of an indication of the fact that maybe it is the fact that kind of shaping the grounds here for a short-term rally for the upside. I would not be surprised that Apple ends up finding some ground. We kind of find some common ground and we start to pick up some momentum on Apple, as we do know that earnings season is going to be on the horizon. So I'm a little bit optimistic about the fact that it's going to be playing out immediately, because I do feel like there is a little bit more of at least one pullback that's pretty much on the way here to pretty much shake out. I know a lot of the bulls. So it would not be surprising that we shake out the bulls here. They kind of lead into this little 1 day rally that we had. We kind of get a little bit of a pullback, and then we squeeze the bears that lean into that direction. So that's where I'm at with it. I would not be surprised though that we kind of get a little bit more of a downside type of action on Apple, and then we start to see that STO actually coming to life, and we see Apple starting to give us a little bit of traction to the upside. All right, so that's where I'm at with it. Do I think it's gonna pay out right out the get-go? Pretty much. No, when I say get-go, starting tomorrow at the opening bell. No, I don't. I think there'll be a little bit of pain that you'll probably see to start that order that came through, but then we'll start to pick up momentum, and I do think that Apple's gonna try to attempt to rally off of the back end of that. All right. So that's to give you a little bit upside on that. But like I said, Apple kind of opened a lot of doors for a lot of different names. The fact that Apple, given the weight that it actually holds in the broader market, it did not surprise me that it opened the doors for names like Meta. I know that Tom was talking about that earlier on. I was talking about Amazon, but Netflix was one that just kept going and going. So that was a big name for me that I was watching today. Microsoft did a lot of heavy lifting for the weight that it pretty much holds in the broader market as well. So that's pretty much just hindsight, just knowing the fact that I gave indications yesterday of all the bottoming formations with the 50 EMA, with the dollar topping getting close. It gave me the indication once I saw the Apple news, even though futures were red last night, it gave me that sign that okay, the market was going to attempt to pretty much rebound. And then, if anything, Apple was going to be the weakness while the rest of the broader market was to rally. And that's pretty much what we saw. All right. Good time to enter at that dip then. What dip exactly do you refer to on Apple? I'm assuming it's still about Apple. In terms of the dip, well, I'm going to pretty much zoom out to the weekly here. I'll give you a little bit of analysis on what I'm looking at. So one of the biggest things is pretty much looking at the weekly, and this is where I'm kind of getting the sign from, is that first thing I notice is that obviously for the weekly candle here, you have rejected that 20 EMA. That's one of the biggest signs. You pretty much came right close enough to that 155 low. You rejected it here off of the weekly here so far, right? You pretty much got that nice little drop off this morning, after the overnight dump. You attempted to pretty much, you actually covered quite a bit of grounds from where it ended up dropping pre-market, that is. And what I would be looking for is that I do think that you have one more, like I mentioned, you have maybe another step to the downside here. I would be looking for an entry on Apple close enough to about 147. If I could get in under 147, that would be the most ideal. But 147, I think, is more so the dip entry that I would prefer to get in on Apple for that upside. Now, I was trying to point to the fact that you may see a little bit more pain off of that STO order that came through before you see it start to gain some traction. So 147 would be that spot that I'm looking at. If you can get an entry under the 147, I think that'll probably be the picture perfect. point of entry, but 147 is where I would settle for, in which case you should see this start to rebound, and you should start to see this rebound and get above that 152 spot if the rally is going to particularly take place off of the back end of that sell to open order. All right, so 147 is the support level. 152 would be potentially my breakout for a rally to attempt to happen. All right. So that kind of gives you that image on Apple. I was going to go ahead and get back to S&P Futures, so we can go ahead and kind of cover grounds. Obviously, the weekly time frame here, you see the bigger picture. You see the descending broadening wedge action. Going to pretty much find out exactly at what point this is going to find some kind of relative bottom. Is this little reversal we had today, is this the true reversal? Or do we get the next leg down? In which case, we're going to be watching for Fuchs to pretty much reclaim back under 36.65, and we could see another strong leg to the downside. Otherwise, I'm going to be roughly looking for support right around that 36 mid 3600 level is what I'm going to look for relative support if we have any kind of dip opportunity tomorrow, any kind of regression off of today's price action. So mid 3600 is what I'm watching for. And then, of course, we want to see if we can make a higher high off of today's price action. And that should tell us if we can start to gain further momentum off of a strong rally that we had today. All right. So again, 30 mid 3600 is what I'm going to watch for, and then breakout level, particularly that I will keep an eye on, is above relatively 3800 is what I'm going to be looking for a convincing continuation of today's price action. All right. So that's pretty much looking at the weekly. As I kind of dialed down to give you a little bit more of a kind of a smaller time frame image of what I'm looking at immediately. What I do see here, roughly off of the 30-minute, is a little bit of a megaphone action that's kind of taking place. And this is similar to, no, I do love broadening wedges in general. And when I say broadening wedges, because when you usually find that last level of support, it's usually a launch pad. That's typically what ends up happening, and that's what I basically saw here with S&P Futures. You had a beautiful launch pad off of that low 3600 level, and that's exactly what you saw, was just a beautiful rip today, a steady uptrend. And once we ended up claiming that little 200 EMA off of the 30-minute here, that's when you started to see us kind of get a little bit of a consolidation around lunchtime. You saw a little bit of a base starting to form, and then we saw the continuation right in through power hour. So that was something that definitely stood out to me off of that. Once I started to see around lunchtime that we started to build a base, we didn't see the regression that I think everyone's thinking about, the fact that, it was a morning pump and then an afternoon dump potentially. No, this gave me that indication that we were pretty much hovering that 200 EMA off of the 30. We were building a beautiful base, and we were going to pretty much see continuation. And that's exactly what we ended up seeing. All right. Eddie, Apple goes under 145. This market is giving all the signs. I don't doubt that it's going to go under 145. It's just a matter of the timing, Eddie, is what I would say. That's pretty much the bigger picture. We already came through 6 red days in a row. We finally saw some kind of life in the market. Now tomorrow, like I mentioned, obviously giving you the upside and downside. I think I mentioned 147 to be support. If we do attempt any kind of meaningful breakout in the coming days here, 152 will be that level. But obviously, if we sink under 147, I am with you that it's going to end up seeing under below that 145. And it's not crazy to say that that is not more so favored, because of the fact instincts would say that off of the news that came out overnight, there's no way that Apple's going to rally, right? There's no way that we're going to see upside on Apple. And that would just be the mindset right now. So I do think that, just hindsight wise, I would say that it favors to go into 145. But the fact that we just pretty much hit the 50 EMA off of SPY, we see a lot of names kind of giving us a bottom. We could see regression, in fact, tomorrow. But if we don't absolutely melt tomorrow, we don't see an actual absolute meltdown, we don't retrace more significantly than what this rally gave us today, I do think that we could see a little bit more of a relief, at least going into the end of the week today, this week. All right. And then it's nothing to say that we can't see more downside come next week. Okay. So kind of getting back to S&P futures real quick. As I was kind of off topic with Apple. Like I mentioned, we had a beautiful trend day. We saw the nice base that we built around lunch hour, and we saw the catapult right into power hour. So I'm gonna watch for continuation here, watching for us to reclaim over 37.44 if we can reclaim over 37.44, or if in fact we end up seeing a gap up tomorrow, I will be watching for resistance off of this megaphone, sitting roughly around this 37.82. We could probably wick up towards 37.85, as high as that, towards the resistance of this megaphone, and that's when it's going to come into play with regression off of today's price action. So I do in fact think that we can see it upside as far as 37.85 before we see the regression or any kind of significant pullback tomorrow. So that's what I'm going to look for, is likely the gap up. I do favor the gap up. Give the bulls some kind of hope going into tomorrow. We likely trap the buyers at the opening bell, and then we start to see the regression right at the open. All right. So that's where I'm kind of in the mindset. That's what just the picture that I'm playing out right now. But playing it level by level, like I mentioned, I want to see us reclaim over 37.44. 37.85 is going to be the next level towards the resistance of the megaphone. Otherwise, where I'm going to look at for the bear side scenario is I want to see if we can actually dump under this 36, roughly 36.60 is where I want to see if we start to get rather aggressive to the downside. That's what's going to give me more indication of whether this rally today actually has any kind of sign of momentum, any kind of sign of continuation. Otherwise, if we sink convincingly under 36.60 here roughly, I expect us to rather, we may end up be flirting with the lows that we had off of yesterday, well, this morning's price action rather. All right. So that's what I'm going to be looking at. 36.60 roughly is going to be that big level. I want to see the aggression off of that level to the downside, or do we start to build a base down there and then we see the next leg higher? Okay. So that's where I'm pretty much just giving you both sides, both scenarios. Obviously, kind of giving you the favor of the fact that no, we're not out of the woods by any means in terms of the rally that we had today. Today could have absolutely been a fluke, and we can see the market give back all of these gains that we had today. But the fact that we were in such oversold territories, the fact that we saw Apple pretty much give out its legs, that opened a lot of doors for a lot of different names to give us a strong rally today. All right. So that's pretty much the basis of looking at futures. I could get into a few names. If there's any names that you guys want to kind of look at, just give me a ticker. You can probably drop it in the chat there. But otherwise, I could probably point to a name similar to even Tesla here. We can point to the fact that off of the 30-minute here, we have a nice little rising wedge action that I could say is kind of playing out. You could probably call it a little bit of a leading diagonal type of action that's playing out on Tesla here as well. And you are closing in particularly on the 200 EMA as well. So that is something that I'll be watching for as well. Roughly right around that 30 290 low is what I'm watching for. I do think it could probably stretch out towards 292 as well on Tesla here. We do know that Tesla's volatility is rather a little bit more extensive. So 292 would be that upside that I'm watching for off of this one. I want to see definitely how it's going to end up reacting once we get up towards that 292 level. Do we see a convincing continuation to the upside, breaking north towards 297? Or do we see the hard rejection at that 292 spot, in which case we're going to break south of this little rising wedge, little leading diagonal action, and then we would end up taking this below 283, and next level I'm watching would be 275 half, roughly. Okay, so that's going to be a rather big downfall if we end up cracking 283. Otherwise, 292, I could see a little bit of a floor type of action playing out at 283. But if we end up cracking below 283, that's when I think there's indications that the fact of how I was mentioning about futures giving out this morning's low, we could end up seeing Tesla just take out the floor, and we could see a bigger drop down, bigger downside off of Tesla here. All right. Let's see, Prachi, how are you? EQNR. I'll take a look at it. Let's see what's going on with this ticker. EQNR. So we are looking at energy. It's a nice little base that you build down here. A nice rebound. That was a pretty strong gap up, I will say that. Relatively a strong gap up that you had. Just to highlight that. Let's see if we can get a highlight on that. There we go. Nice little highlight indication on that. Now, the fact that you're in a very large gap fill above as well, that is something that's very interesting. So that tells me the fact of why we're seeing such a strong reversal off of this. Now, indications to me tell me that you are going to see a little bit of a regression off of this before you get completion of the gap fill. I would be watching for a pullback. There is a nice base that you built here, and I will outline that base right now. See if I can get a there we go. So we do have a nice base sitting roughly around this. Let's see what level this is. Roughly around 33, just below 33 half is what I'm watching for as a base that you build. You see that you attempted to break out of that 33 half mark on three different occasions between yesterday and today. You hit that resistance three different times before you had that convincing follow through off of today's price action. So I will be watching for this to retest that level. It would not be out of the one that we end up breaking down below 33.53, and then we end up testing, which would be roughly around 33.31 is what I'm watching for off of that resistance that we tested prior. So 33.31, I think that is still a viable dip type of entry here off of EQNR. 33.31, then you're watching for the to reclaim over 33.53, and that should take out today's high, and you should see continuation up towards the gap fill. And the other highlight that I'll be watching for right towards when you get to the gap fill is meeting that 200 EMA close enough to 34 half. All right. So I do like this one in particular. I think the biggest thing I would say is just be prepared for a little bit of a dip. I don't think it's going to be anything meaningful that'll likely hurt your position if you are in one right now. But 33.31, I think that's where you want to see this particularly hold. Otherwise, if you end up losing that 33 mark, 33.17 under the 20 EMA, that's when I would say that you want to reconsider the fact of holding that position or necessarily taking the loss, or if you're already in profits, to pretty much use a stop profit and choose to get out. All right. So that's how I would pretty much analyze EQNR. Let's take a look at what other names. Veer, you mentioned Netflix. Let's take a peep. Netflix had a monster rally. I gotta say that was a monster move. I didn't expect it in the fashion that it did it today, but that was a monster move that we saw out of that. Just looking at pretty much the daily here, you have a beautiful little wedge action that's taking place on this one. Why did it seem that my lines moved? All right, there we go. So a nice little wedge that's built on the daily for Netflix. You can obviously see off of prior weeks that we've had price action on Netflix. That was a massive daily candle here on Netflix. And that's why I say the price action that we saw, it was up about roughly $18 on the day. It was just nonstop even through lunch hours. It did not even show any sign of weakness. So that was a strong, convincing move. Now, I do believe that you are getting close enough to a top. I did mention the fact that maybe we could see a little bit more upside on futures, possibly a little bit of a gap up. So it would not surprise me that you get close enough to 249 half. I want to say ballpark, you're watching 250 overall as your resistance. But that 249 half to me tells me that I don't think you're going to get a convincing break on the first attempt tomorrow to break north of that resistance for this little triangle. So I would wait to see any kind of meaningful pullback off of that 249 half and then look to see the broader market if there is relative strength or are we seeing any broader market weakness to pretty much determine whether you want to take a entry or otherwise, if you're already in a position for Netflix, obviously you're looking to pretty much exit your position at that 249 half, 250 spot. But if you're looking for pretty much I want to say a quote unquote dip type of entry, so I expect the first attempt off that 250 mark to be a rejection. Watch for a retrace right back down towards 242. I do believe that if we see regression like I'm expecting in the market off of whatever kind of gap up or ever kind of minimal upside we'll see tomorrow morning, I would look for the regression, look for this to pretty much retest around that 242 level, and then look to see if you get a meaningful reversal at that point tomorrow. So that's what I do like. The 249 half is where I say is your upside. If you get any kind of meaningful pullback, watch for that 242 level, and then you could possibly get a reattempt at breaking north of the trendline resistance. All right. So that's what I would watch for that one. The other name that you mentioned was HD Home Depot. I believe this was actually, yeah, it was actually on the newsletter last week, if I'm not mistaken. And I haven't even changed, not even a thing on this chart. That's actually the funny part. So you can basically see off of the daily here, you had a pretty clear descending broadening wedge action. And this is what I was talking about, kind of the inverse of how the dollar looks. This is basically the inverse pattern of how the dollar looks right now. You have a more of a descending support as opposed to how the dollar was looking earlier. You had an ascending resistance. So you obviously see that last leg, you see how much of a steep type of price action it is. In terms of this case being a bullish descending pattern, you basically see how much of an upside you had as opposed to the dollar that we're at resistance. I want to see how much of a rash regression that we end up getting. All right, but that was just a side note. But back to Home Depot, you see the descending running wedge, you see the head and shoulders action that took place. This is pretty much when I was actually writing about this last week, more so towards seeing some more downside. I actually had a little bit more downside here. We got close enough to my demand that I was particularly watching, close enough to that 263 half. So we did fall short of it, just pretty much short of it. You have a nice little descending support. You had a nice little wedge action off of the breakdown from that head and shoulders. So you had quite a significant continuation to the downside, but a strong reversal is what you got. You see the convincing downtrend resistance, and this is a tough spot that you are sitting at right now. This is where I would say that you should see a reversal back to the downside. How aggressive it's going to be back to the downside, or if it's just a minor regression, maybe a little bit of a second opportunity, a dip opportunity to pick up, the upside for Home Depot. I would anticipate that you're pretty much retesting the neckline. You get a pullback. In terms of support that I'm watching here, that would roughly be right around this 277 mark is what I'm watching for support. So if you are in a position for Home Depot right now, you're watching tomorrow, watch for support at the 277, or rather into the end of the week here, depending how quick we get down to that level. But 277 ideally should be the support. That should be the second attempt to get into a position for Home Depot for the upside. And then we're going to be looking for continuation right above today's price action. All right. So if we can get a support right off of that 277, break north of 283 half, then I do think that we have a shot of basically further upside, and we should attempt to fill the gap fill that's sitting above 294. All right. But that's how I would pretty much look at that. Otherwise, if we break south to 277, there's nothing that's telling me that we should not come down to the demand zone that I initially had. And I would just be looking right back down towards 263 half, right into my demand zone. All right. So that's what I'll be looking at with Home Depot. Like I mentioned, though, I do want to see particularly broader market perspective. Let's see if how Apple kind of does hold up tomorrow. Like we saw Eddie kind of saying that he expects us to go under 145. I do expect it to go under 145. It's just going to be a matter of how soon. So that is something I'm going to be watching. I'm watching that 147 level. We can't hold 147, and we see market sell off pretty much persist and pretty much escalate. Then I do not rule out the fact that we could see Apple under 145 rather really quickly, even the fact of tomorrow. So that'll be something I want to see on the broader perspective. And then, of course, how do we see the continuation on a lot of these names that saw just impulsive moves today? Looking at the Meta, looking at Netflix, looking at Microsoft, I do want to see how those names particularly hold up tomorrow. And that'll be something that I'll be keeping an eye on from a broader perspective. Just seeing how the rotation is kind of taking place right now that we saw. And then I do want to see how that relative strength to weakness is going to play out tomorrow as well. All right. But other than that, I think that kind of just concludes everything that I was watching, everything in terms of levels that I want to highlight. So hopefully that kind of gave you guys a better outline. But other than that, I will conclude today's segment with that information. You guys all have a great afternoon, and I